Imagine driving through a quiet coastal city late at night. The streets are empty, and the ocean wind moves through silent buildings. A passenger suddenly appears and asks for a ride. You start driving, but when you glance in the rearview mirror, the back seat is empty. The address they gave you leads to a neighborhood destroyed by the 2011 tsunami. In this video, we explore the strange mystery of taxi drivers in Ishinomaki who reported picking up passengers that mysteriously vanished after the 2011 tsunami. On March 11, 2011, Japan experienced one of the most powerful earthquakes ever recorded. The magnitude 9.0 Tohoku earthquake struck beneath the Pacific Ocean off the northeastern coast of the country. Less than an hour later, massive waves rushed toward the shoreline. In some places, the tsunami reached heights of more than 40 meters, sweeping inland and destroying everything in its path. Entire towns disappeared in minutes. More than 15,000 people lost their lives, and entire communities were forced to rebuild from nothing. Among the hardest-hit cities was Ishinomaki, a coastal city in Miyagi Prefecture that would later become known not only for the devastation it suffered, but also for the strange stories that followed. Ishinomaki was once a lively port city with busy streets, schools, and neighborhoods stretching along the coastline. After the tsunami, however, large sections of the city looked almost unrecognizable. Buildings had been flattened, vehicles were scattered across streets, and entire neighborhoods had simply vanished. For months, recovery teams searched through debris while survivors tried to rebuild their lives. During this difficult period, residents began reporting strange experiences. Some people claimed they heard footsteps in empty buildings, while others said they felt sudden cold sensations or saw figures standing silently near the ruins of former neighborhoods. One group of witnesses kept coming forward with remarkably similar accounts. The witnesses were taxi drivers. Night shifts in Ishinomaki had always been quiet, especially after the disaster when fewer people were out in the evenings. Several drivers began reporting encounters that sounded almost identical. Late at night, someone would approach the taxi and ask for a ride. The passenger would appear calm and quiet, often dressed in everyday clothing. But during the ride, something unusual would happen. When the driver glanced in the rearview mirror, the back seat would be empty. The door had not opened, and there was no sign the passenger had ever been there. The driver later said the moment left him deeply unsettled because the experience felt so real. One of the most well-known investigations into these reports began several years later. A sociology student named Yuka Kudo from Tohoku Gakuen University decided to study the phenomenon as part of her research. She traveled to Ishinomaki and interviewed taxi drivers who had been working in the city since the disaster. Many drivers were reluctant to discuss the subject, but several drivers agreed to describe what they had experienced, and their accounts were surprisingly similar. One driver told Kudo about a young woman who entered his taxi on a cold evening. She appeared normal, though she looked pale and quiet. She asked to be taken to the Minahama district, an area that had been completely destroyed by the tsunami. The driver explained that the neighborhood had been devastated and very few buildings remained there. The passenger paused and then asked a question the driver said he would never forget. "Have I died?" When the driver turned around to respond, the back seat was empty. Another driver described picking up a middle-aged man who asked to be taken to a residential area that had been heavily damaged during the disaster. During the ride, the driver spoke very little. When the taxi reached the location, the driver turned around to say they had arrived, but the seat behind him was empty. The door had not opened, and there was no sign the passenger had ever been there. The driver later said the moment left him deeply unsettled because the experience felt so real. Stories like these spread quietly across Ishinomaki. Some residents believed the reports were connected to the tragedy itself. Thousands of people had lost their lives suddenly, and entire families had been separated in minutes. In Japanese culture, there was a long tradition of stories about spirits lingering in places tied to powerful emotions or unfinished journeys. Some locals wondered whether the encounters described by taxi drivers represented people who had died during the tsunami and were somehow trying to return home. Before jumping to supernatural explanations, researchers began examining the situation more carefully. One important question was why so many reports came specifically from taxi drivers. Psychologists suggested that night drivers spend long hours alone in quiet environments, which can heighten awareness and imagination. They are also constantly watching mirrors and passengers, making them more likely to notice unusual details. After a traumatic event like the tsunami, the human mind can sometimes create vivid experiences while trying to process grief and loss. Another possibility involves the way stories spread within communities. After disasters, people often share memories and emotional experiences with one another. Over time, certain stories become symbolic of the collective trauma the community has endured. In this sense, the ghost passenger stories may represent a way for survivors to express the lingering presence of those who were lost. Instead of being literal encounters with spirits, the stories could reflect how deeply the disaster affected the people who lived through it. Still, what makes the Ishinomaki reports unusual is the sincerity of the witnesses. Many of the taxi drivers who shared their stories did not appear to be seeking attention. Some were uncomfortable discussing the subject publicly. They described their experiences simply as strange moments they could not fully explain. Researchers who interviewed them often noted that the drivers seemed calm and thoughtful when recounting the events. Another detail that continues to interest investigators is the timing of the reports. Most sightings occurred in the months and years immediately following the tsunami, when the emotional impact of the disaster was still fresh. As the city slowly rebuilt and life returned to normal, the stories became less frequent. This pattern suggests that the phenomenon may be linked to trauma and recovery rather than an ongoing supernatural presence. Even so, the stories remain an important part of the history of the disaster. They reveal how communities cope with sudden loss and how memories of those who died can shape the experiences of the living. In some cases, local Buddhist priests reported performing ceremonies for families who believed their loved ones' spirits might still be wandering. These rituals were intended to offer comfort and closure. Today, Ishinomaki looks very different from the devastated city it once was. New buildings stand where debris once covered the ground. Schools, businesses, and neighborhoods have been rebuilt. Visitors walking through the city today may find it difficult to imagine the destruction that occurred in 2011. Yet the stories of the ghost passengers remain part of the city's memory. The question of what really happened to those taxi drivers remains open. Were the encounters simply misunderstandings shaped by stress and exhaustion? Were they expressions of grief shared by a community trying to recover? Or were they something stranger that science and psychology cannot yet fully explain? No investigation has provided a definitive answer. What we do know is that the 2011 tsunami left more than physical damage along Japan's coastline. It left emotional scars that took years to heal. The stories of the ghost passengers remind us that disasters affect people not only through destruction, but also through the memories they leave behind. And that raises a question worth thinking about. When thousands of lives are suddenly lost in a single moment, do those stories disappear with time, or do they continue to echo through the places where they once lived? The people of Ishinomaki rebuilt their city, but the mystery of the tsunami ghosts still lingers in memories and quiet conversations. And even today, the mystery still lingers in the quiet streets of Ishinomaki. Were these encounters simply the mind trying to cope with unimaginable loss, or were the taxi drivers experiencing something we still cannot explain? If you enjoy exploring real mysteries like this one, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more fascinating stories from around the world.